What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we've got our Week 12 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Real quick, before getting into our breakdown, a quick word from our partners at Prize Picks, which is our favorite DFS site of choice this NFL and fantasy football season. If you guys aren't familiar with them, do yourself a favor and check them out. In fact, when you sign up right now and use code ADP, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And look, we're already doing all this research for fantasy football matchups. So why not take advantage of it and get some profits as well? Prize Picks, well, they allow you to basically do exactly that. They have so many different player prop bets, not only in terms of single stat DFS, but also in terms of fantasy score. And you can combine them any which way you want. Super simple, super easy to use. All you have to do, choose two more players from the board, and then just pick the over-under on their projected fantasy score or on their single stat. Again, pretty much for every single matchup as the week progresses, those options will be updated even more so. And then the great thing is you've got two different options in terms of how you want to bet it, whether it's a flex play, so that way you can miss one of your selections but still win. Obviously, that's the safer choice. Or if you want more bang for your buck, check out the power play, where if you get all your picks correct, well, you win even bigger. So again, check all of that out. Details in the description. And we kick off Week 12 on Thanksgiving Day with the Bears at the Lions. Here, I'm mainly looking at the Bears side of things, namely Darnell Mooney would be the guy that I'm considering. Now, I do have Allen Robinson's name here as well, but with an asterisk next to it, because I really do think on this short turnaround, it would be, unexpected for him to suit up. He missed week 11, and I tend to believe he will not be playing versus the Detroit Lions. But if he somehow does, I think he would be worth a start. So with that being the case, it would lessen the ceiling for Darnell Mooney a little bit. But again, I don't think that that's a reality at this point in time. No reason for the Bears to rush back Allen Robinson, in my opinion, in a game where they don't really need him. The Lions defensively, they can be had with the offensive pieces that the Bears possess, aka Darnell Mooney, and I think a heavy dose of David Montgomery, whether it's with Justin Fields or without Justin Fields under center. But either way, I think Darnell Mooney has the highest upside out of really any wide receiver for the Bears. We saw it last week. He got so many targets. It was ridiculous. And I think he can be a solid mid-level wide receiver too on the week yet again. I wouldn't go chasing the points with Marquise Goodwin. I know he had a huge touchdown last week versus the Ravens, but with that being the case, it was on one big play, and especially if Allen Robinson returns, then forget about Goodwin. And again, I think this is going to be a case where the rushing attack kind of takes the lead for the Chicago Bears. So I don't think we're going to see necessarily more than one or potentially two if Robinson plays fantasy relevant wide receivers for the Bears. And then for the Lions, don't get me started. Their wide receivers continue to be sit after sit, week after week. And this week is no different. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Khalif Raymond. It's the TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift show in Detroit. Whether it's Boyle, whether it's Jared Goff. Yes, this Bears secondary can be had, but I don't have enough faith in any of these Detroit wide receivers, so I would be fading all of them. Then Raiders at the Cowboys. I would start Hunter Renfrow. Yes, he's coming off arguably one of his worst performances all year, but I think last week was a perfect example of why Renfrow is still the fantasy wide receiver for the Raiders that you should trust the most, because he was still number 2 on the team in terms of targets. Bryan Edwards nowhere to be found. Zay Jones barely did anything. I have both those guys as sits, and I think Hunter Renfrow is going to, get back in terms of having a high reception count, high target count. We're not going to see every single week where Josh Jacobs has 7 targets, something like that. So for that reason, I think Hunter Renfrow is going to get reintroduced into this offense. It's not going to be 2 back-to-back down weeks for him. I think he'll be a solid low-end wide receiver 2, maybe a little bit of a higher ceiling in PPR formats. For the Cowboys, this is where it's interesting. CeeDee Lamb exited last week with a concussion. Amari Cooper, he had a positive COVID test, didn't play, and with a short turnaround, probably not going to play again. Same with CeeDee Lamb. So you're left with Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson. And I actually think that they both are viable starts. Definitely Michael Gallup. And then Cedric Wilson is a nice sleeper. I don't think we're going to see the Cowboys offensively struggle like they did versus the Chiefs too much. And if you think about it, the Raiders were the opponent. The Chiefs kind of got it going versus a couple of weeks ago. I think the Cowboys can return to form offensively versus them as well. So I think Gallup and Wilson are both very decent plays in the wide receiver 2 range in week 12. Let's move on to Bills at Saints here. I'm mainly looking at the Bills side of things. Yes, they've kind of struggled as of late, even though Stephon Diggs, again, I continue to say it, has come into his own. Again, similar to last season, he should be the wide receiver you feel most confident starting in. No questions about that. But the Saints defense, even though they struggled with it last week, they do have a decent rush defense. And the Bills running backs, none of them are anything all that special. I think all of these wide receivers, potentially in PPR formats, can get you at least 10 points. That's why I have all 3 wide receivers for the Bills as starts. Emmanuel Sanders going up versus his former team, kind of knows that system. We'll see how much he's utilized. That'll be interesting to see. And then Cole Beasley, always a decent PPR option in games that could potentially have high scoring upside, which I think could be the case here. For the Saints, I don't trust anyone. It's more so, do you trust Trevor Siemian? And then what are the actual wide receiver options? They're not all that great. So for that reason, I'm sitting Traquan Smith, Deontay Harris, and Marquez Callaway. It's pretty much here the Mark Ingram show. You mix in one of the tight ends, and that's it. Then Steelers at the Bengals. I actually like, all the main wide receivers here. Deontay Johnson, he's been a stud all season long. He's getting all the targets for the Steelers. You continue to start him, high-end wide receiver 2. And Chase Claypool, he had a decent outing this last week. I think just kind of the touchdowns are missing compared to last season, but in standard formats, he's still a decent play here. I think we could see some points in this game. For the Bengals, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. Yes, the entire trio doesn't happen all that often, but this Steelers defense is banged up really badly. And for that reason, I think all these guys, again, have an outside chance of getting you at least 10 points. Chase has that touchdown upside. Yes, T. Higgins disappointed last week, but I think he's going to get more involved. And then Tyler Boyd actually had a decent performance. Normally, I wouldn't advise starting all 3 of these guys, but with the Steelers defense being so banged up, I think it could be a good opportunity for these Bengals wide receivers. Moving on, Panthers at the Dolphins. I'll start DJ Moore for Carolina. Don't get it wrong. With Christian McCaffrey back, he has the highest upside out of any pass catcher. But out of the wide receivers in particular, I still do like DJ Moore the most. I think the difference is now with Christian McCaffrey back, he is, more so a mid-level to low-end wide receiver 2. For the Dolphins, Jalen Waddle, he continues to be the main name because he's the healthiest guy there. Devontae Parker and Will Fuller, if they play this week, even though I think it's kind of a stretch, no concrete word one way or the other. If they do, you could take a chance on one of them. But right now, I would just continue to go with Jalen Waddle. And then Robbie Anderson, I would sit, with McCaffrey and DJ Moore. I think they're above Anderson on the food chain. Just, in my opinion, not all that much upside. So I would be fading Robbie Anderson. Moving on, Eagles at the Giants. For the Eagles, it continues to be the case. There's only one name you need to know, Devonta Smith. Just realize that there are boom or bust tendencies with him. So, he can get you high-end wide receiver 2 numbers, and then he can get you single-digit numbers as well. For the Giants, if Sterling Shepard plays, I continue to say this, he's the one I would feel the most confident in. If Shepard doesn't, then Kadarius Toney kind of has that, wide receiver 1 role on this offense. It's a matter of, does Daniel Jones give him good opportunities? But in terms of volume, I think he's a decent play in PPR formats, in that low-end wide receiver 2 range. Don't get me started on Kenny Golladay or Darius Slayton. Specifically, Kenny Golladay hasn't done anything this season, potentially one of the biggest bust free agent signings. And if Sterling Shepard returns, I think it'll only get worse for Golladay. So benching those guys there. And again, not even mentioning any of the wide receivers other than Devonta Smith for the Eagles with good reason. Afterwards, Titans at the Patriots. This is interesting for the Titans because Julio Jones unavailable. Obviously, Derrick Henry, not going to be available for the rest of the fantasy season. So it's been a lot of pressure on the passing attack. And A.J. Brown, yes, he's the most trustworthy option, but Nick Westbrook is a guy that saw a lot of targets this last week, and he'd probably be the next wide receiver of choice that I would take a chance on. Definitely a long shot or dart throw, but the running backs for the Titans aren't getting it done. I don't think they're going to break out versus the Patriots. So you're going to have a lot of throws to guys not named A.J. Brown, and I think Westbrook is the next guy with the highest upside as long as Julio Jones is still out. And then for the Patriots, Jacoby Myers, in PPR formats, he's the guy I would take a chance on. Now, again, don't get me wrong, doesn't have huge upside. And this Patriots offense, not really all that fantasy friendly. Yes, they'll get you wins in the NFL, but in fantasy, not all that much huge upside here. So if ultimately, you want to sit Jacoby Myers, I understand why. But out of all of these options here for the New England Patriots offense, I think he is the most consistent and guy with the highest floor, similar to maybe a low-end Hunter Renfrow, if you're thinking it from that perspective with the Raiders. And then I'm sitting Bourne and Aguilar, just because, again, consistency issues, and I think that they are too boom or bust. Afterwards, Falcons at the Jaguars. I'll start Russell Gage here. Not other too many wide receiver options. Yes, you got Zacchaeus. Again, continue to butcher that name. He's a guy that I would start if and only if Cordero Patterson does not play. If Patterson doesn't play, then you're going to need somebody other than Kyle Pitts, somebody other than Russell Gage to get it done. I don't trust this rushing attack without Cordero Patterson. That's why I think Zacchaeus could then be a decent dart throw. But again, realize this Falcons offense has kind of been really bad. The good thing is here it's versus a favorable matchup in the Jaguars defense. That's why as crazy as this sounds, if Patterson doesn't play, would feel all right starting two Falcons wide receivers. And then for the Jaguars, Marvin Jones. Yes, he's been disappointing as of late, but this is a good matchup versus the Falcons. Similar to, these not so big names for the Falcons that maybe you start in fantasy and can produce you decent output. I think Marvin Jones can do the same here versus the Falcons. But I do anticipate a decent dose of James Robinson. And Laviska Shenault, it seems like everyone around him might get injured, but he's still not really producing at a high enough level. I'm going to continue sitting him. Afterwards, Bucs at the Colts. With the Bucs, the situation. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and if Antonio Brown plays, great, you start him. This offense for the Bucs is loaded, and I think all these guys, when on the field, yes, they might have lower upsides, but they're kind of all in that wide receiver 2 range. For the Colts, Michael Pittman, yes, he's kind of been quiet these last couple of weeks, but that's been because it's been the Jonathan Taylor show, and with good reason. However, I think here versus the Bucs, the Colts are going to have to get their pass catchers a little bit more so involved, and Pittman is the guy that highlights that crew, so I feel good about starting him. But other guys, T.Y. Hilton, Pascal, I didn't even mention him here on the sits because, I feel like he's just an afterthought at this point in time. I think that's just getting a little too cute, and Pittman remains the primary guy here in what will probably be a bounce-back game for him. Moving on, Jets at the Texans. This might look crazy because I have 3 names for the Jets as fantasy starts. One of the reasons, again, you look at the matchup. This Texans defense, not all that imposing. And with Joe Flacco under center, this offense does have higher upside. Now, if Flacco plays, then I feel much better about starting all three of these guys. If he doesn't, then I wouldn't get as cute. I'd probably be looking to sit Jamison Crowder, something like that, because Elijah Moore has kind of been coming on as of late. I'm not sure whether that's a result of, the quarterback change, because he didn't have all that much success with Zach Wilson, something to keep in mind. But I think all these guys here in PPR formats can get you around 10 fantasy points, especially because Michael Carter going to miss several weeks. And, Ty Johnson, Coleman, not exactly, in my opinion, have that same type of upside. So maybe the Jets rely a little bit more so on their pass catchers. And then for the Texans, yes, I know these wide receivers haven't been getting it done these last couple of weeks, but versus the Jets, again, a decent matchup. I think if there's any opponent that Brendan Cooks can kind of get right versus, it would be versus the Jets. But again, just realize that he is kind of in that low end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range with good upside. But the game script has to go positive and in his favor. Next up, we've got the Chargers at the Broncos here, and I'm mainly looking at the Chargers side of things here with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Allen has been the guy more so as of late, even though Mike Williams did kind of bounce back finally this last week. However, in PPR formats, I do prefer Keenan Allen. High-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 type of situation. And then for the Broncos, I'm honestly sitting this entire trio. I think anyone that tells you they can correctly pinpoint which one of these Broncos wide receivers to start on a week in and week out basis is absolutely lying. Now, if you force me to pick one, I'd probably go with Jerry Jeudy. But with all of these guys there, with Noah Fant, with the Chargers having a bad rush defense and probably seeing a lot of Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams, I just don't trust anyone here, whether it's Patrick, whether it's Sutton, whether it's Jeudy. So for that reason, I would sit this trio. Afterwards, Vikings at the 49ers. I like both duos here, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen for the Vikings. That's kind of been the case all season long. For the 49ers, Deebo Samuel, he continues to do really, really well. And you see Brendan Ayuk here. He had a big week in week 11 after probably a lot of people sat him. But I will say with Ayuk, to some extent, I think that was a result of Elijah Mitchell not playing, because when Mitchell is there, that rushing attack is a lot better overall for the 49ers. I'm not saying that, Jeff Wilson and Sermon can't get it done at all, but just not quite to that same extent. So maybe it puts a higher emphasis on the passing attack for the 49ers. And that's why you see Brendan Ayuk a little bit more so involved. So the point being, if Elijah Mitchell doesn't play, I think Brendan Ayuk has a higher ceiling. And if Mitchell does suit up, then maybe Ayuk in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range. Afterwards, Rams at the Packers. Here, it seems bold, but I would go with all 3 Ram wide receivers. Cooper Kupp is obviously a slam dunk. That's easy. Let's move on. Van Jefferson. I said before that I think he's potentially the wide receiver 2 now on the Rams. Yes, Odell Beckham might have something to say about that. And he didn't really do all that much in his first game with the Rams, but that was to be expected. I think it'll be very curious here what happens coming out of the bye week for the Rams. But mainly, this Packers secondary just really isn't good. So I think we could see a lot of Van Jefferson and Odell Beckham. I don't think necessarily one guy is going to absolutely obliterate the other in terms of production. But I think both Jefferson and Beckham can get you at least 10 fantasy points, especially in PPR. For the Packers, Devontae Adams, that's easy. Let's move on. It doesn't matter who he goes up against. I still have enough confidence in him. Other names for the Packers: Lazard, Randall Cobb, MVS. Speaking of MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling coming off a huge performance this last week versus the Vikings. But that was a situation where Alan Lazard didn't play. Keep that in mind. I think this Rams defense is better than that of the Vikings. And if Lazard returns, then it becomes a crapshoot at the wide receiver 2 position again for the Packers. So I wouldn't get too cute here. I would sit the remaining Packer wide receivers. Then moving on, Browns at the Ravens. If there's one wide receiver you start for the Browns, it's Landry, even though I think this isn't a pass-heavy Browns offense, so there's a lot of risk starting Landry. In standard formats, I probably wouldn't even do it. He's much more so a PPR guy, but versus the Ravens here, especially if Lamar Jackson plays, I think the Browns are going to have to throw the football. That's why I take a chance on Landry. And for Baltimore, Marquise Brown didn't play last week. If he suits up, obviously you start him. And then also I would start Rashad Bateman, but that is if Lamar Jackson plays. He didn't play versus the Bears this last week, but that was due to illness. So for that reason, I expect him to suit up versus the Browns. And then I'd be sitting Rashard Higgins. I just don't like the passing upside outside of Landry on this offense. Even he's, potentially an issue. And then Sammy Watkins with Bateman, with Marquise Brown, with Mark Andrews. I think he is somebody that just doesn't have enough upside, so I'm sitting him here. Afterwards, Seahawks at Washington. I'll begrudgingly start Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, even though I don't think that, Russell Wilson, his finger necessarily 100% healed. Maybe he rushed coming back. I'm not sure what the situation is, but that offense has looked broken, these last couple of weeks with him back. That is concerning. I think both Lockett and Metcalf are kind of low, mid-level wide receiver twos. For Washington, Terry McLaurin, the Seahawks defense doesn't scare me. Just realize that Terry McLaurin is basically Washington's version of Tyler Lockett. He is very much so either boom or bust, either 100+ yards with a touchdown or like 50 yards, no touchdown, and bust type of situation. So just keep that in mind. But with that, we wrap up our Week 12 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.